My grandparents, gosh, I think about having Easter dinner at my grandparents' house and pulling out the pictures. I went on a trip to Australia and New Zealand with Muhammad, with his amateur boxing team, with a bunch of people. And I pulled out, not a bunch of people, but there were about 30 of us on that trip. So I guess it's a bunch. But we spent 2 weeks on that tour and it was an amazing time. And I came back and I was excited and I pulled out the photos and I showed my grandparents over Easter dinner. And my grandpa, I pointed out who my boyfriend was at the time. And I, pointed him out in a photo. And my grandpa said, well, that one sure looks like a purebred because he was dark skinned. I wanted to just put the pictures away and like, how can you look at him and that's what you think instead of saying how amazing that your teenage boyfriend is on Muhammad's amateur boxing team or sparring with Muhammad. Like what an amazing experience. How cool is that? Tell us about him. But it was no, that one must be a purebred. And I thought, like, what a terrible thing to say. My grandparents were very, very racist. So much so that, fast forward years later when I married my husband, none of them came to my wedding or anything. It was a sad, sad time to have that reaction. My parents were great to an extent. They did not want me marrying a Black man. So I guess that's not so great, but they loved the people that were in our lives and still do love the people that were in our lives at the time.
How does that make you, and let me clarify something to the audience and the listeners. This ain't trying to throw Kelly up under the bus or anything, but what I want people to do is really sit back and listen to the story and ask yourself, this is what I'm going to ask you on this question, and two-part question. If that opportunity hadn't came, now roll with me for a minute here, because I think people need to understand this. You talked about your grandfather who said, oh, that's a pure blood, blah, blah, blah. Your parents, would they had accepted all of these things had it not been Muhammad Ali? I know this is a what if question, you know what I mean? Because the reason I said is because they didn't want you to marry outside of the race. But you are able to go on these tours with Muhammad Ali and blah, blah, blah. So I get what Muhammad Ali just said about, let's call it the past because of who he is. Had he not been who he was, how do you think the narrative would have been? And I know that's just a hypothetical question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is hypothetical. And I cannot say I imagine that the reaction would have been different for sure and a lot less agreeable. I will say that I've been married 36 years and my parents embraced my husband eventually. And
what do you mean when you say eventually? How long did it take?
Gosh, my biological father when my husband and I sat down with my biological father and said we were getting married, he said, I'm concerned about how the world will treat your children. But if this is the decision you're making, I'll love you both like my own. And I'm here for you 100% and so on and so forth. So I think that's reasonable. I think that for a father to express his concern is a loving and protective thing to do. And he was concerned out of love. Our children have been loved by the world and very well received.
What were you afraid of? What were you afraid of? Because let's get real. That's real. That's a real situation that most people who are white and other nationalities, because it's not just white. I've heard other nationalities. I have a friend who is from Lithuania, and she says, Andre, I've never seen a Black person in my life because there's none in Lithuania. And then she said, my first encounter with Black people, she hated them, and she didn't even know them.
Wow.
And I asked her this question, I said, well, how did you not like them if they didn't have any? She said, because the people I was around always said negative things about them. But what changed your mind? She said, I got to kind of like what you did. She said, I met a couple and was like, wow. But I get that they would say that. And I'm just thinking, just imagine yourself if you didn't get that opportunity. Yeah. Could your mind have been, I'm not even going to say closed-minded because I don't want to call closed-minded because everybody's mind can be open. But just think, had you not had an opportunity, you might have been a product of that same situation or that way of thinking. Were you thinking that prior to me, Muhammad Ali? Was your mindset going that direction?
I think I was more just under a rock like I said, race, I had not had any real encounters with people of other races, which sounds crazy.